Hey guys, build report for the Whipper Clipper. It's a project based on the Blue Clipper, the Dan Armstrong Blue Clipper. It's a non-inverting amplifier with hard clipping on the output. We'll go over the schematic a bit in this one because it's pretty straightforward. That's my PCB, I'm just holding it up so you can see it, and you can get those from my web store, of course. So actually, before we go into anything about the actual pedal, I just wanted to tell you a little story. I did a giveaway for these PCBs and it was a Guess the Effect giveaway. So I played, that's the actual pedal. I played some sounds through the pedal, played some riffs, and you had to guess what it is. And I was actually, I had a feeling that the responses were going to be varied, but I didn't realize by how much. They were just all over the place. People were guessing heavy metal distortions, other people were guessing light overdrives, fuzzes. The responses were all over the place, and when I actually announced what the pedal actually was, I think a lot of people were very, very surprised. So yeah, it was a pretty interesting experiment, and in the build doc I say leave your expectations at the door, because it may not be what you think it may not sound like how you think it's going to sound. When somebody says a simple non-inverting, op-amp amplifier, you sort of think to yourself, oh, okay, so it's just going to be something simple and uninteresting. But just wait for the sound demo before you make your mind up with that. So there's a couple of essential mods with this one as well, which will get you something that sounds like mine. And to be honest, without the modifications, it does kind of, it's a little bit sort of NQR, but I'll go over that when we look at the schematic. So first, let's take a physical look at the pedal. So I've been doing a lot of this, and you're going to see a lot of build reports come up with a similar sort of scheme. So I've hand painted on the top, and I've got a video going over excruciating detail on how to do that and what paints to use and all that sort of stuff, and I've put epoxy layer over the top. One thing you may have noticed, or you may not have, is there's a bit of a that's actually that sort of wear. It looks like a wear mark is actually from sanding. With the first layer of epoxy I put on, I think I had an issue with, I don't think I put enough on, and it was very ripply, so I sanded it and put another coat on it, and it looks much better. The actual epoxy looks much better, but I went a little bit too far down around the corners, and I gave it a bit of a scuff around the outside. But overall, I'm really happy with how it looks. It's got this sort of, I don't know, retro looking pattern on the top. I was just playing around with a pattern, just doing whatever, and that's what I sort of came up with. Volume and gain, VG, on the side there. These are the 13mm aluminium knobs I have. They're very expensive because they're, we're looking sort of, I think they're $3.20 Australian, so probably about, I don't know, $2.40 American. They're not cheap, but I do like them, particularly for situations like this where you've got practically no clearance for rotation there. They are actually touching slightly when I do that. In fact, they're not touching. I thought they were touching, but I think it's just the rotation of the pot that's a bit rough, not actually touching. It's absolute, like, you probably can't even see on the video how close that actually is. It's very, very close. Drill doe's a little bit too close. So that, they get me out of trouble usually, because you don't end up with it. They don't end up any bigger than the actual nut underneath, or the washer maybe underneath. So as long as the washers aren't touching each other, the knobs won't touch each other. So they're pretty good in that respect, but yeah, they're pretty expensive. Mini DC jack as always used. Pretty sure I've used mini monos in this. Is a perfect candidate for a mini mono, but we'll open it up in a moment. 3mm LED on the front, which I think I've just glued in place. Sorry, this one was from a while ago, about at least 6 months ago. I'm miles behind on my bill reports because of family commitments, etc. So let's open up the pedal and have a look inside. And we, like I said in the introduction, we will actually look at the schematic for this one as well. We will have to look at the schematic because I'll need to explain the modifications to you. This is a really good screwdriver actually. My father-in-law was a auto electrician. He's retired now, and if you're after a really good screwdriver, I've never heard of this brand before, but they're pretty. I know a lot of professionals use them now since I've had one. Wera, really good. It very rarely slips, and just a nice heavy screwdriver that screws very well. It's the one I go to for if I've got a tricky screw that won't come out or something like that. Not just pedals, but anything, because it tends to grab better than your typical economy type, or whatever you'd want to call it. So yeah, we've got Lumberg Mini monos in there. I've wired it all up in green, excuse me, because I've got an excess amount of green wire. So the modification this is probably the part that you'd want to see. Oh, actually no, we'll just talk about a few things. So low profile capacitors, I always use those. I just use those now. I just don't see any point using anything else. And in fact, the web store is pretty much going to be just limited to the low profile capacitors. I just don't see using anything else when you can get something that's so small. You might as well just use it. For pedals, obviously there's the height restrictions that often come into play, so using those you don't have to worry about them. Some capacitors are quite tall too, and in a particular situation like this where it's also crammed, it's just reassuring to know that the height of the capacitor is probably going to be the highest thing, particularly if you don't use a socket like I haven't used on that chip. If you use a socket, it's probably going to be, the chip's probably going to be the highest thing, like that. You can see I've used a socket for that capacitor up the back, which is part of the modifications I'm going to talk to you about in a moment. And I had a few of those, I had a whole stack of these European 1N4 148s, and they were yellow. They were painted yellow. There's going to be no electronic difference between a yellow 1N4 148 and a normal sort of orangey red coloured one. Don't get me wrong, they're going to sound exactly the same. I just like to chuck in a little oddball component every now and then just to make things look interesting. Oh, what's that? Well, it's actually just a 1N4 148, and if you scratched off that yellow paint, you'd probably see underneath it looks exactly like a normal glass reddy orangey colour 1N4 148. But yeah, that's what they are. They were European. I got thousands on eBay. Someone was selling a whole reels of them, and I just bought a ton of them. And I used to sell them on my web store, but I don't have any more. I've only got like 50 left, which I use every now and then. And yeah, that's so you can see the PCB. Sorry, I need to look in the preview screen so I'm not flying off the camera here. You can see the PCB is tight, but it does fit in a 1590A, and that pot at the top, let me get the PCB, that pot at the top you can directly mount with a 9mm pot. It'll just go straight in. I realise there's a lot of people that watch my channel that don't build a lot of pedals, so let me just explain that again. By PCB mounted pot, you can see that you can just slip it straight in. You don't need to run wires to the pins. So it's sort of a convenience thing. Pros and cons to everything though. I like doing that just because it's quick and usually relatively easy. Particularly if the PCB only has one pot on it. You don't have to worry so much about, like if you've got a PC, I'll go into a little bit of detail here. Again, for people that aren't up to speed with pedal building. If you've got, let's just say you've got like 6 pots on this PCB, you have to drill very accurately, otherwise the pots end up going skewed. Or you drill bigger holes on the front of the enclosure, but not too big, obviously. Otherwise, you won't be able to mount the nut to anything. So it's a bit of a compromise. So it can get a little bit tricky when there's a lot of pots on the PCB. But for one like this, it's just so easy just to do a PCB mounted pot. So actually, also something I forgot to mention in the introduction. Why did I actually do this project? It was actually because I hadn't actually designed a PCB for a while and had it fabricated. I just wanted to get back on the ball, and I always wanted to do a Blue Clipper, and I just sort of thought, well, yeah, I'll give it a shot, and I'll just do it for practice. And I got the actual effect back, and I started playing around with the modifications. I just thought this is too good not to actually make the project file for and actually have as a project. It just actually sounds too good. I'm a big fan of it. I really like how good it sounds for what it is. So that's actually why I did the PCB. Yeah, even though it's such a simple project, I thought it was worthwhile, you know, continuing on and actually having it as a project. So yeah, I suppose we could probably talk about the modifications. I was actually going to read a little bit from the project document. I'll just zoom that back a little bit. But you can read this in your own accord, but it actually has the 2 modifications on here, and it's probably going to be a good refresher for me anyway, because like I said, it was about 6 months ago. So let me narrate the modification to you, and I'll slip in any comments that I need to talk about as well. So I've got here, so the 2 modifications are more treble and a gain control. The gain control is really easy, so I'll start with that one first. So the bottom dial here is the gain control, and all that is tapped into. You can see R4 is not populated. It is because there's 2 wires underneath that going down. You just can't see them. They're underneath the PCB, and they run to the pot for the gain control. So that's this is the explanation. R4 in conjunction with R3 sets the gain of the op amp. This resistor could be replaced with a potentiometer for a gain control. Note that you can use your guitar's volume control as a pretty effective gain control when the pedal is at the beginning of your pedal chain. So if you don't want to do a gain control, you can still use the volume on your guitar as a gain control, but you have to have that as the first pedal in your chain, which is probably a good spot for it anyway, because it's a good booster for other effects coming after it. But if you don't want to be limited to that, you can put the gain control on the actual pedal, which I like to do. I don't like to sort of be railroaded into using a pedal in a particular position in a pedal chain. You might feel the same, you might not, but for me, I just rather go to the extra effort to put the gain control on the actual pedal. So that's the gain control. So it said R3 in conjunction with R4. So those 2 set the gain. And I'm pretty sure I actually used a 500k pot for R4. Actually, I can't remember. And it's actually so far in that I'm not keen on pulling it all out. Maybe just experiment with that value. If you've got a decade resistance box, you could hook it up and just test, put some sockets on R4 and just test what limit you want your gain control going to, because I seem to recall I went too far with the gain control. It just started, you stop getting gain and you just start getting a lot of noise and oscillation. It doesn't sound very good. So yeah, you probably want to experiment with that value. But the higher up you go is the limit of the gain. So the more resistance you put as R4, the higher it will go. There's an equation where you can work that out with non-inverting op amps. Just look up the equation, non-inverting op amp gain resistor or something like that, and you'll be able to learn a bit more about how those 2 work together. And then the second modification, we'll get back to the schematic in a moment. I'll just read it to you again. So that's the more treble modification. A stock blue clipper is very dark, lacking treble. Is a very dark, lacking treble distortion pedal. It's very dark. Like, it just doesn't sound very good to me. It sounds just washed out and muddy. There's no clarity or anything to it whatsoever. I'm not quite sure why the pedal was originally released like that. When just changing that treble, adding a bit more treble to the pedal makes it just sound so much better. There might actually be a reason why it was designed that way, a specific reason. But for a general pedal, I think that it's best to change it. So I've written in order to correct this, we can decrease C4 to allow more treble at the output. I would recommend this as a must modification and would not recommend 33 nanofarad as a standard value. 3.3 nanofarad is a replacement value that has been suggested. I won't mention the website that came from because it sounds like I'm sort of bad-mouthing it, and I'm not. It actually got me on the right track. It was very helpful, the actual website, so I'll just leave it out. A very popular website. Anyway, but I found this to be too harsh, so too much treble. You really want to socket this capacitor, experiment between these values till you find what suits your preference, or use a toggle switch to incorporate a treble boost switch. So you can go from 33 nanofarad to whatever your preferred, your favorite setting is with the switch. You probably would want to do that in a bigger enclosure than a 1598 though. I'm not sure you'd fit it. So what did I use? Let me just have a look. I actually settled on 10 nanofarad. I found that to be the best, and I did actually spend a fair bit of time mucking around with that capacitor, just because it just had such a fundamental impact on the final sound, and when I got it right, I just went, you know, like, wow, that sounds awesome. And it was actually at that point that I decided to release it as a full project. So that is this capacitor on the output, and it's a pass filter. Is it low pass or bypass? Oh, low pass or high pass? I always get this wrong. Well, you can work it out logically, can't you? So if 33 nanofarad, let's just do this, right? Let's do this mental exercise together for people that are new to this sort of thing. If 33 nanofarad is cutting off treble, it would mean that that treble is being bled to ground. So let's just go the other way. If that was 1 nanofarad, so significantly smaller amount, you'd be sending a lot of treble to the output, and you'd be sending less treble to ground. So it is a high pass filter because it's allowing high frequencies to pass. I'm not sure. I always get that wrong, but that's how it actually essentially works. So yeah, as I just explained, that is actually how that works. Those two, the resistor and the capacitor, in that configuration, is how the frequency filter works. So yeah, experiment with that one. The more you lower it, the more treble you'll send to your output. So just play around with those. You can play around with the diodes as well. I didn't. I just went for silicon. I just went just straight up as what's standard. But you could try germaniums on those. It could sound good. You'll get less hard clipping on the output, so it'll sound less distorted. But you'll get a higher volume on the output, and it's a little bit different. It's a bit softer. Sounds a bit softer. So you could socket those as well. So that's pretty much it, what I want to talk about with the pedal. Like I said, really surprising how good it actually sounds. I went to a lot of effort, as you can see, to actually box it up, do the project and everything. That's just how good I think it actually sounds. And the giveaway, I must admit, was a little bit, I have to be honest with you here, it was actually a little bit of an experiment for me, because I was so shocked with how it sounded. I actually just wanted to see what you guys thought. If you didn't know what it actually was, if I had said, oh, it's a Blue Clipper, have a listen to the sound demo, you're probably just gone, oh, another Blue Clipper, who cares? But I wanted to actually put the blindfold on for that one and see what you actually thought, and the results came back, I don't mean to sound arrogant here, but they came back exactly as I thought. No one had a clue what it was, and the responses were just so varied. So that's probably about it for this video. Thanks for watching. The next one's going to be a sound demo. Make sure you check it out. Like I said, big surprise, I'm sure, if you haven't heard one before. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and all that sort of jazz. Cheers.